It's really a huge man-made feature in North Dakota, right? And it does have some impacts on our weather, of course, right? Yes. Take it away, Jacob.
I love doing these Morse Code of Weather segments, and especially when they're viewer suggested. I had a viewer from Hazen call me about this about a month ago, and I thought I'd turn it into a Morse Code of Weather segment because Lake Sakakawea has certainly altered our landscape in recent memory, and it can create its own weather, influences some of the weather patterns on a really localized basis. So here's the Fort Berthold Reservation before and after the Garrison Dam was constructed and Lake Sakakawea filled up. You can kind of see the old track of the Missouri River there, and now how much land is covered by water. It's over 300,000 acres in size, Lake Sakakawea is, and what used to be farms, homes, schools, etc., they're now underwater once that lake filled up over a long period of time after the Garrison Dam was constructed, which happened between 1947 and 1953, with being operational between 1944 and 1955, obviously until now and many years into the future. And here's some aerial views of the just scope and scale that Lake Sakakawea is. Provides obviously a lot of recreation, but the main purpose of it, outside of providing hydroelectric power, is to control flooding. Now, the reservoir storage capacity across the United States, some of the highest reservoir storage capacity is right along the Missouri River, with the Garrison Dam and Lake Sakakawea having the highest reservoir storage capacity. Fort Peck and the Lake Oahe dams are also up there in terms of storage capacity. So again, one of the main impacts is controlling flooding. And this isn't necessarily weather related, but we talk about flooding as meteorologists as it impacts North Dakota a lot. So controlling flooding, you might remember the 2011 flood, a lot of people do, but it ranks towards number 22 on the list of historic crests of the Missouri River at Bismarck, meaning that even though it was bad in Bismarck for flooding in 2011, there were a lot higher crests on the Missouri River before the Garrison Dam was constructed in the 1800s and the early 1900s up until about 1950 when the Garrison Dam was operational. And you can see that spillway being opened up on June 23rd, 2011, and that obviously caused a lot of impacts downstream into Bismarck. Into the winter of 2010-2011, there was already a lot of precip, so the soils were saturated. Then the records amounts of snow that happened in that winter, and then tremendous amounts of rainfall began to accumulate in the early summer of 2011, and that just caused the Army Corps of Engineers to continually increase their releases from the Garrison Dam. So the 2011 flood in Bismarck was bad, and Mandan, but uncontrolled, the Missouri River flood crest would have been much higher, more than 5 feet higher than it was. So 24.4 feet would have been the crest had the dam not been there, compared to 19.2 feet, and that's according to the Army Corps of Engineers. So the cumulative volume of water in the 2011 flood was almost 1.5 times greater than the 1952 flood, one of the last floods before the Garrison Dam was fully constructed and Lake Sakakawea was there as a reservoir. That had the highest peak volume. The crest of the 1952 flood was more than 8 feet higher than 2011 in Bismarck. The 1952 flood was 27.9 feet as a crest in Bismarck, compared to the 19.2 feet for the crest in the 2011 flood in Bismarck, because the dam spread those releases of water over a longer period, again mitigating the impacts of the flooding. So Garrison and the other dams in the Missouri could not prevent the widespread flood damage in the 2011 flood, simply just too much volume of water based on all those cumulative factors of snow, precip, and melting. But the Corps says that dams prevented about $44.2 billion in damage throughout the Missouri River system, all 6 of the dams that are constructed along the Missouri River. Garrison alone was credited with preventing about $13.7 billion in damage. So that's obviously the big impact, kind of what the Garrison Dam was constructed for, to control flooding, specifically in Bismarck-Mandan. Now, what are the weather impacts of having that big body of water, that's the 3rd largest man-made lake in the United States, right here in the center of North Dakota? Well, one of them is lake effect snow. As cold air goes over the relatively warm water, the air picks up moisture, and it can lead to a convective process in the atmosphere, lead to cloud formation, and then for snow to fall downstream of the lake, and oftentimes it impacts Bismarck-Mandan. This was October 27th, so just about a week or so ago. So lake effect snow basics here, you have the warm water, and water keeps its heat longer than air does. With the cold air going over that, picks up the moisture, picks up that the water evaporates into water vapor and then condenses into our clouds, and then we can get enough rising air for precipitation to form, and in the wintertime, that'll be in the form of lake effect snow. So you have that heat and moisture coming into the atmosphere. General rule is that you need a 23-degree temperature difference between the lake surface water temperature and the air temperature 5,000 feet above our heads, enough to create enough instability or enough rising air in the atmosphere for those lake effect snow bands to form. What's called the fetch, or the longest length and the wind direction over the lake. That fetch usually needs to be about 62 miles for heavy snow. On Lake Sakakawea, that fetch is only about 20 to 25 miles at its longest point. That's why we don't see prolific lake effect snow events in North Dakota like they do on the Great Lakes, but most common in fall when the water temperature is still at its warmest, or in the early winter, and the wind speed determines how far inland that lake effect snow gets. Another weather impact is with fog. This was a case on October 9th of this year when the wind was out of the east, coming over a pretty large fetch of Lake Sakakawea, picking up enough moisture into the atmosphere for fog to form. Another weather impact of having that big lake. But why does the water temperature stay more constant than the air temperature? Well, it has a higher specific heat than the air does. So here's Lake Sakakawea's water temperature by month. You'll notice the warmest months of the water temperature are from June through October. The current water temperature is about 40 to 47 degrees. Now compare the Lake Sakakawea water temperature to the Garrison air temperature. And you can see that the water temperature is kind of shifted towards the fall. It changes slower than the air temperature does, and that's because water has a high specific heat, so it takes more energy to heat up than land does. So that's why you can see the lake effect snow happen before the lake freezes over, usually in the late fall months, as the water is still very warm compared to the air temperature. So a couple of interesting weather impacts that we see, especially downstream of the lake, with Lake Sakakawea now being constructed compared to before about 1950.
It is really a cool thing, though. I mean, and the lake effect snow here in North Dakota, we don't have the size of Great Lakes, obviously, but we had flurries after that snowstorm last week, thanks to the big lakes.
Exactly.
So,
localized weather phenomena. Pretty interesting.
Really cool indeed. Thanks a lot, Jacob.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jacob.